Welcome to the Robert Morrison Project YouTube channel. This is the first video of what we hope will be many videos to come. My name is Phil Remmers and I serve as the president of the Robert Morrison Project, a nonprofit organization that seeks to explore how Reformed Christian publishing can and should be used in the formation of a global mission strategy. Publishing is not often associated with missions. In fact, it's rare to hear people talk about missions and publishing in the same conversation. This video is an attempt to see the big picture of where Reformed publishing as a whole is going. Not just one publisher, but all of them. And is the direction it's going in structured in a way to support the needs of the church worldwide? So without further ado, let's get started. Reformed publishing and global missions. Where are we on the publishing map? To answer this question, it's helpful to ask two additional questions that help define where Reformed publishing is currently at and where it stands in relation to the needs of the church worldwide. Here's the first question, and it has two parts. Currently, what is the total number of Reformed publishers in the English-speaking world? And what has been the rate of growth in recent years? Over the past 75 years, the geographic center of Reformed publishing has been the English-speaking world, particularly North America and the United Kingdom. But 75 years ago, it was barely on the map. Back in 1945, there were only 3 Reformed publishers: Presbyterian and Reformed, InterVarsity Press in the UK, and Crown and Covenant. 30 years later, in 1975, the number had grown to 11 publishers. And 20 years after that, in 1995, the number had grown to 30. Now, 30 publishers might seem like a large number, but actually much more growth was to follow in the years ahead. In the early 1990s and early 2000s, there was a confluence of factors that helped propel Reformed doctrine, churches, and publishers to extraordinary levels. There was John Piper, Tim Keller, R.C. Sproul, and Mark Dever. There were conferences such as the Gospel Coalition, T4G, and Desiring God. Then some key books were published, such as Desiring God by John Piper or Mark Dever's book, The 9 Marks of a Healthy Church. Then the number of seminaries began to grow as well. There was Southern Seminary, Westminster Theological Seminary, Reformed Theological Seminary, the Master's Seminary. And all of these factors, pastors, key seminaries, and conferences, they all emerged alongside of each other, with Reformed publishing being one part of this larger movement. One seemed to fuel the other. Each encouraged the other to grow, so that today, the Reformed understanding of the Christian faith is truly turning into a global work of God. In the midst of all this amazing growth, what is less understood is the degree to which Reformed publishing has grown. As I mentioned, in 1995, there were 30 Reformed publishers. But today, 26 years later, that number has grown to 62. There are 62 Reformed publishers in the English-speaking world. That's more than 100% growth over the past 30 years. In the description below, I put a link to a spreadsheet listing these 62 publishers. No other language or region in the world has experienced similar growth in terms of the number of Reformed publishers or in the number of books being published. Now, there are a number of ways to interpret this growth, and one way is to ask another question regarding the global demographics of the church. The next question is, over the past 75 years, where in the world has the church grown the most? And where in the world is the church projected to grow the most in the future? For more than 1,000 years, the geographic center of the Christian faith was in Europe. Around the year 1900, there were about 550 million professing Christians worldwide, and about 70% of that number lived in Europe. Most were Caucasian. But after 1900, there were some breathtaking changes. One of the biggest changes is that the geographic center of the faith shifted south and east. Today, the geographic center is in Africa and Asia, with Latin America not far behind. The term frequently used to describe this area of the world is the Global South. Let's take a closer look at one of the continents in the Global South. In Africa, in the year 1900, there were about 10 million professing Christians, or about 10% of the population. A century later, in 2000, the church had grown to 350 million. And today, that number is about 650 million, or about 50% of the population. By 2050, the church in Africa is projected to surpass more than 1 billion. The growth of the African church is one of the largest expansions of the church in the history of the church. But Africa is not unique. Other countries have experienced similar growth. According to the World Christian Encyclopedia, the church in Asia was 313 million in the year 2001. But by 2025, the church is projected to grow to 460 million. That's an increase of 46% over 24 years. Country after country in the Global South has seen and is projected to see massive church growth. Now, let's step back and take a look at the big picture. We made two broad observations. One is the spectacular growth of Reformed publishing in the English-speaking world over the past 75 years. The second is the remarkable growth of the church in the Global South over the same period of time. The key thing to notice here is that these two movements are occurring in two different geographic locations. Please don't miss the significance of this. The supply and the need are in two different places. The lack of published resources has enormous implications on our ability to effectively train pastors and plant healthy churches in the regions of the world seeing the greatest church growth. Yes, there has been some very encouraging progress in the past 10 to 15 years. No doubt about it. But so much work still needs to be done. The reality is that we're barely scratching the surface of meeting our current literature needs. Most languages today in the Global South have little or no literature in pastoral training, evangelism, or discipleship. But what is more alarming is that we have not even begun to think about future needs 30, 40, or 50 years from now. For example, if we're unprepared now to meet the literature needs of the African church when it's 650 million today, what are we going to do when the church grows to 1 billion by the year 2050? If we're unprepared now to meet the literature needs of the Asian church, what are we going to do when hundreds of millions of new believers are added to the church over the next 30 to 40 years? In terms of literature, are we in the Reformed community preparing for these global demographic shifts? Unfortunately, we are not. There is an urgent need within the Reformed community to take a long, hard look at the trajectory of our publishing efforts and see how it relates to the needs of the church worldwide. We in the English-speaking world have been blessed with an abundance of great books. But with 62 Reformed publishers, the market is flooded with an overwhelming number of books. We're quite literally swimming in a sea of books. It's like an overflowing bathtub, with the water still pouring into the tub. If you go to a Gospel Coalition conference or a Desiring God conference or a similar conference, the bookstores are absolutely massive. Typically, they're the size of several basketball courts. In fact, some conferences give away large numbers of books for free to each person who attends. Several years ago, I went to one T4G conference and they gave away 18 free books to every attendee. Now contrast this abundance with the needs of the church in Africa, Nepal, Myanmar, Vietnam, Iran, Pakistan, and Russia. The regions of the world where Christian literature is needed most, unfortunately, often have few or sometimes even no resources available. Recently, Crossway Publishers created a very helpful graphic illustrating this publishing imbalance. Under the world map, the caption says, "The majority of Protestant Christians live in non-Western countries. 85% of the church leaders in those countries have little to no resources or theological training." Crossway is exactly right. Now, what conclusion should we draw? Well, the most obvious is that this lack of resources greatly hinders our church planting efforts worldwide. It's an uphill climb to plant churches when no supportive literature is available. But this publishing imbalance also reveals some much deeper, more fundamental issues. I believe the key issue is this. The scarcity of Reformed titles around the world raises questions about the credibility of our belief in some of the key tenets of Reformed doctrine. For example, as Reformed believers, we believe the gospel is good news for all nations. Our passion is that the glory of God would cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. Habakkuk 2:14. Our passion is that biblical truth would permeate every culture of every nation. We believe that biblical truth is universal and not limited to just one nation or ethnic group. Zane Pratt recently wrote, "The Son of Man will have dominion that encompasses all peoples, languages, and nations. The Messiah is a global Messiah." Yet over the past 50 to 100 years, these doctrinal convictions have not translated into an effective global publishing strategy of our literature resources. Reformed publishing is still largely centered in the English language. It's almost as if there's an inordinate disconnect between what we sing and preach in churches on Sunday morning and how we think about how our literature is used around the world, or if a strategy exists at all. In terms of literature publication and distribution, we're missing the grand purpose for which this theology exists. So, what should we do about this publishing imbalance? Well, stay tuned. This is a vast and very complex subject. In the near future, Lord willing, I hope to make additional videos that explore in detail the relationship between Reformed publishing and global missions. In the meantime, I encourage you to visit our website and learn more about how you can support the global church through Reformed publishing. You or your local church can support specific publishing projects around the world. Please also hit the subscribe button below and follow us on Instagram so you'll be informed when the next video comes out. If you have any questions or comments, please contact me via the link below. Thank you for watching.